When you record macros, you can record them using absolute cell referencing, which is the default, or you can choose to record them using relative cell referencing. When you record a macro using absolute cell references, Excel records the exact location where you entered your data. None of your pointer movements are recorded, such as using the up and down arrow keys. Unfortunately, if you use Excel's default absolute cell references when using multiple cells, you may not get the results you expected. First, I will show you the problem with absolute cell references so that you will be able to identify it. I will start the recording of the macro by clicking on the Start Recording button on the status bar. Let's name this macro Absolute Referencing. There can be no spaces in a macro name. I will enter Shift+B for the shortcut key. I will store the macro in this workbook. For the description, I will type entering values into multiple cells using absolute cell referencing. I will press the OK button. The recording starts. I will click in cell B2 and enter the word Excel. Then press the Tab key once and type 2024. Press the Tab key twice and type Macro. Press the Tab key twice and type Tutorial, then press Ctrl+Enter. I will stop the recording process by clicking on the macro Stop Recording button. I will click in cell B4 and type the shortcut key for the macro, which is Ctrl+Shift+B. I wanted to repeat the entries in row 2, but the result is that cell G2 became the active cell. This is because it repeated the entries previously made. This is because Excel uses absolute referencing by default, which does not adjust for any changes in the row or columns. Now, let's record the same steps, but this time we will use relative addressing. I will click on the ribbon's View tab. I will click on the down arrow of the Macros button. Notice the appearance of the icon for Use Relative Addressing. It will change in appearance after I have selected Use Relative Addressing. Now, when I click on the down arrow of the Macro button, you can see how the icon has changed. This time, instead of starting the recording from the status bar, I will select Record Macro from the Macro button. Let's name this macro Relative Referencing. I will enter Shift+C for the shortcut key. I will store the macro in this workbook. For the description, I will type entering values into multiple cells using relative cell referencing. I will press the OK button. The recording starts. I will type the word Excel in cell B2. Then press the Tab key once and type 2024. Press the Tab key twice and type Macro. Press the Tab key twice and type Tutorial, then press Ctrl+Enter. This time, I will stop the recording process by clicking on the Macro button and selecting Stop Recording. I will click in cell B4 and type the shortcut key Ctrl+Shift+C. This time, the macro worked the way we intended. Microsoft should have made using relative references the default. Absolute referencing works fine when you want to apply actions such as applying formatting to a single cell, but it doesn't work well for multiple cell entries. For the second part of this tutorial, I want you to see how macros are driven by VBA Code and how you can make changes to it. We will alter the code created by the absolute referencing macro to make the macro repeat the same pattern of text in the row where you start the macro. Click the down arrow for the Macros button and then select View Macros. The Macro dialog box opens showing all of the available macros. I will select the absolute referencing macro. I will click on the Edit button. When you record a macro, you are creating VBA code. VBA is a programming language. VBA stands for Visual Basic for Applications. Studying the results of the code created when you record a macro is a good way to learn VBA. The code for each macro that you create is stored in its own separate block of code called a procedure. A procedure begins with the keyword sub and ends with the keywords and sub. Sub is short for subroutine. Procedures are often referred to as subroutines. Notice the sub statement is given the name you assigned to the macro. After the sub statement comes several lines that start with a single quote. These lines that appear in green are comment lines. These lines are ignored when running the macro. They only appear as an aid to help you remember important facts about the macro. Next comes the code statements that make the macro perform its steps. Notice that cell addresses are placed in range statements. Range statements select these exact cells. That is why, when you ran the macro, the data was entered into the exact same cells as they were originally entered. We will change the code so that the first cell used is no longer cell B2, but whatever cell you are in when you start the macro. The range C2 is one column over from cell B2. Therefore, we need our code to reflect the move one column over from the active cell. We can do this using the offset method. The offset method uses two values. The first value is the row. The second value is the column. We want all of our data to appear on the same row, so we don't want to change the row from the active cell. Therefore, we use a 0 for the row to keep it where it is, and we use a 1 to move over one column. The range E2 is 2 columns over from cell C2. We also want our code to move 2 columns over from the active cell. Therefore, we use 2 for the column value of the offset method. The range G2 is 2 columns over from cell E2. We also want our code to move 2 columns over from the active cell. Therefore, we use 2 for the column value of the offset method. I will click on the Excel button to return to the spreadsheet. Now, no matter what cell I am in when I start the macro, I get the intended results. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Click on the link in the description below to get additional great free content. Share this video with your friends and colleagues. Comment below with any questions or suggestions for future tutorials. We love hearing from you. Have a great day.